we're going to drill down into the details of the basic JDBC program. We're in my Emacs editor. We're looking at basic.jdbc.java. This file is included in the zip called basic.jdbc.zip. This file together with the jar file. So let me go through the imports to begin. All of these types are included with core Java, so we don't need the Postgres jar file for these. We can compile in the usual way, nothing fancy. Starting with the driver manager, this is what's going to handle communications between our app and the database system, in this case, Postgres. The same thing would occur, by the way, if this app were a web app rather than a standalone Java app. A connection is a connection, as you would guess, between our program and technically the driver manager. We connect to the driver manager connects to the database, but conceptually, the connection is between the app and the database system. The statement type represents an SQL statement, a fairly standard statement, we hope, so we don't have to deal with peculiarities of different systems. A result set is a collection that we get back from, for example, a select query. We've seen that already. To be more precise, it's really a collection of rows, table rows or view rows. And an SQL exception, as you would also guess, is what can go wrong if we screw up. Properties is just a set of key-value pairs. It's basically a subtype of a map. Technically not, but basically that's what it is. Let me get down to the code. Just to remind you, I've hardwired the data for convenience, 20 records. Properties we looked at before. Basically, this line sets the user to Fred, because we set that up in PSQL, and the password to secret. So if you don't have Fred as a user, and Fred doesn't have secret as a password, this isn't going to work. This code is a little bit tricky. I need to see if the table exists already when I run the program, because I don't want to keep adding the same 20 records over and over and over again. There are a number of ways that you might do this, so let me explain what I do. I have a flag initialized to false. Then I go into a try block. Everything is going to be in a try block. We're talking to a database. Things could go wrong. We create a statement using the connection. Here's the SQL statement we're going to execute. Select count star as total from the table. So basically what I'm going to do is ask the system, how many records do you have in that table? We execute the statement. The result set has an associated cursor, basically an iterator. So I need to position that basically to the next record. And then I check whether that count, which I'm saving as total, is greater than 0. If that's the case, then I've already populated the table, so I return true. Otherwise, I return false. So the first time you run the program, false is going to be returned, and the program's going to create the table and populate it with data. Here's the setup, which does most of the work. So this first line contains a URI. Sometimes you'll see it described as a URL. That's just a subtype of a URI. JDBC : PostgreSQL : localhost is the machine I'm on. We could be on a different machine. PostgreSQL supports secure connections to databases that are on different machines. We'll get into that when we talk about security. And ski stuff is the database name, and we created that earlier with PSQL. The properties are the username and the password. We grab those. Now we get to the critical lines. Class for name is a convenient way in Java basically to load a class file. And the class file we want is org postgresql.driver, and that's in that jar file that we use. So that loads the driver code basically. We then use the driver manager to get a connection object. These two lines are really the critical ones in setup. If we get by these two lines, probably we're going to be okay. Don't get me wrong, things can always go south, but we should be okay if we get by these two. I then check to see if the table already exists. If it doesn't, I create a statement. I use that. I call this createDB. I'm using that in a loose sense to mean the data. Really, it's a table. So I create the table. I insert the rows. I'm doing a commit after all of the rows are inserted. That's for efficiency. I close down the statement. I close down the connection. So at this point, I'm not connected any longer to the database. That's deliberate, because even the first time, I now want to do a proof of concept test, and that's test creation insertion. Here, by the way, are the grimy details of the SQL. Here's the create table code. So the table has 4 columns, an ID, which is an integer key. I'm letting Postgres generate those values. It's convenient. So this is an auto-generated integer ID. It's the primary key. A product is basically text, varchar, maximum size 50, same with category. Price is a floating point value. Insert rows is also a little bit grimy, so you get the feel that we're really at a low level. So consider this SQL statement. Insert into skis, etc. the table, product, category, price, not ID. Postgres handles that. Values. Now here's the catch. You can see these single quotes in here. It's a little bit ugly. The reason is that the product and the category are basically text. I've got to surround those with quotes. There are embedded blanks, for example, in the product names and in the category names. For the columns 2 down here at the end, that's basically the price. I don't need quotes there. That's a floating point value. So I iterate over my array, and then basically for each item in the array, I create a record in the table. Finally, we're going to test all of this. Again, we get a connection, a statement. This time the statement is very simple. It's a select star from skis, etc. It doesn't get much simpler than that. And then basically I iterate across that record set and print each one out. So for review, let me do that. I'm going to go to my bash shell and let me run this once more. And you can see there are the 20 records that we've seen a couple of times before. So let me summarize. This code is meant to be our first look at JDBC. We get a sense that it's low level. I wouldn't worry too much about each and every detail right now. This is also a utility for you to use, because by using this, what you can do is create a table in a database without having to enter the records one at a time. The program will do that for you.